Hi, this is Steve Schaefer again, and this is the second video in the John series. Today we're going to be looking at John 1:19 through 58. In the first section, if you recall, John reflects on the meaning of Jesus, and he talks about Jesus as being the Son of God, the one that was there before creation, the one who was the Word, the light, through which everything was made that has been made. But he also talked about John the Baptist, as he's referred to in the Synoptic Gospels, and his reference to John the Baptist was that John was a witness through whom all would come to believe in Jesus. Now, in this second section of chapter 1, verses 19 through 51, we see how that plays out. John is a witness, and it's organized in a 4-day structure. So you have this repeating phrase in verses 19 to 51, and the next day. And so let's take a look at those days. On day 1, John is challenged by some leaders from Jerusalem. Those leaders ask him basically, who are you and why are you baptizing? And John clearly says, I am not the Christ. I am not the one you're looking for. They ask him, are you the prophet? Are you Elijah? Who are you? And he says, no, it is not me. Those references to Elijah, the references to Moses, are all steeped in Old Testament references. The references to Elijah, of course, Elijah was the great prophet of God who was taken up into heaven and never died. And so it was reference to the fact that when the Messiah would come, in the day of the Lord, Elijah would return first as a precursor, as an indicator of the coming of the Messiah. That's a reference to Malachi 4, verse 5. But there's also a reference to being the prophet like Moses. The prophet like Moses is a reference to Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15, where Moses says, God would raise up a prophet like me. And so the Israelites looked forward to the day that God would raise up that prophet. And so that's why the leaders from Jerusalem challenged John, asking, are you him? Are you the prophet like Moses that we've been waiting for? And he says, no, I am not that one. Then in day 2, John sees Jesus walking by, and he says, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. That phrase, Lamb of God, is very likely a reference to Isaiah 53, verse 7, where in the words of Isaiah, there is this sacrificed lamb, the one who would bear the sin. And the lamb reference is also an allusion to the Passover lamb, the lamb that was slaughtered so that the Israelites could leave Egypt, the lamb that was offered every year as a sacrifice for the atonement of sin. And so John calls Jesus the Lamb of God. But it's also interesting that John says that the reason that he was baptizing was so that Jesus could be identified. John did not know who Jesus was by sight, but he was told by God, the one on whom you see the dove descend, that is the one that I am sending. And so as John is baptizing, Jesus comes to him and is baptized, and when John sees the dove descend and remain on him, he knows that that person was the one that God sent and was a reference to him. And so John says, that's how I identified him. I identified him when he was being baptized. The Spirit of God rested upon him as a dove. On the next day, day 3 and day 4 are combined, actually. We begin to gather some disciples, followers of Jesus. And so we have identified Andrew and then Simon Peter. These were disciples of John that when John pointed to the Lamb of God, the one that he had been talking about, they pursue Jesus. And then we have Philip and Nathanael. And what's interesting about Nathanael is that Nathanael is not mentioned in the Synoptic Gospels as being one of the followers. So we have these four, Andrew, Peter, Philip, and Nathanael, who become followers of Jesus. In this language, as we have this first-person dialogue between Jesus and these followers, Andrew, Simon, Philip, and Nathanael, there are some words that the author, John, uses that seem to have dual meanings. And that's one of the characteristics of this fourth gospel, this spiritualized, this gospel that has a sense to it which is different from the other synoptic gospels. Words like follow. Of course, follow means literally in this story that they would pursue Jesus, literally walking behind him. But it also means to become a disciple, to be devoted to Jesus. When he says things like, where are you staying? The word there, stay, is also the word remain. And so later on in the gospel, there will be these references to I abide with the Father and the Father abides with me. He remains with me. So this word to stay means literally to be still and to stay, but it also means to be in unity, to be together with, to be one in spirit with. So the language and the words evoke these dual meanings. We have also, in one chapter, traversed an enormous list of names for Jesus. He has been called Messiah and Christ. He has been called Elijah and Moses and the prophet. He's been called the Lamb of God and the Son of God. He's been called Rabbi, teacher. He's been called the Son of Joseph, the Son of Man, and the King of Israel. That's in addition to what he was called in the first 18 verses, where he was referenced as Word and Light and Life. So John, in just one chapter, has really piled on the identity of Jesus. He has given us all kinds of language to work with in a reference to who Jesus is. At the very end of this section, in verse 51, in the middle of a phrase that Jesus is speaking to Nathanael, he says you would see greater things ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. And that phrase, Son of Man, is specifically a reference to Jesus' humanity. And it lies in great tension with the declaration that Jesus is Son of God. So is Jesus Son of God, or is he merely a human Son of Man? That is the big question to be addressed through this gospel. That is the big question that we have to address as we consider who is Jesus. Just like the Pharisees and the leaders from Jerusalem asked John the Baptist, who are you? Why are you baptizing? Who is this Jesus? Is he just Son of Man, or is he Son of God as well? These are the questions we need to explore as we read and continue to read through the Gospel of John. Hope you'll join us next time for the next reading. The next reading will be John chapter 2, verses 1 through 35.